because this topic is something that I think is very important to all of us. And then we'll go to breakout sessions for the rest of the day. I have a choice of 3 different topics. This presentation, I'll start with a presentation to kind of frame up the topic, and then we have an excellent panel. We've scheduled a good deal of time for this. So I'm very confident that we'll have good quality time for question and answer and comments from the floor. Sometimes we say from the podium, please limit it to questions and not speeches. But this morning, we're going to invite suggestions and comments very much. So as you're thinking about some of the issues we present, we very much, will welcome your comments because we've put a fair amount of time to this. And why have we put so much time and put this in plenary? As we've been talking globally so much the last couple of years about over-tourism, with the incredible growth of demand and overcrowding at sites. It's been such a hot topic for very good reason. As we've been discussing it somewhat here, and if you're engaged at all in sustainable tourism, you've been thinking about it, reading about it, hearing about it. Over-tourism is very real, and there are many solutions to it. There are many causes and there are many solutions to the situation. One of the solutions to over-tourism, separate from just managing the crowded sites better, is figuring out how can we disperse the visitor to more places. And how can we spread the economic benefits so that more people are benefiting? Because that's one of the sad ironies too, is that when we overcrowd a site, we're making that site maybe less desirable, but we're putting all the economic benefit into fewer places. And so there's a twin solution of dispersing the visitor, or twin benefits of dispersing the visitor to more places. We get a better visitor experience, thank you, and more economic benefits to more people, spreading the people out. So that's the topic. So I'm going to first set out a number of key issues that are related to this, and then we'll call up the panel one by one, and we'll eventually sit here and have some good discussion. And so panelists, as you hear me bring up an issue, please don't consider it covered. These are just some thought starters to get things going. We'll want each of our speakers then to go into further detail on some of the issues. So let me kind of raise out what are some of the issues. So we have 7.5 billion people on the planet. Every month, more and more of them have the economic capacity to travel. It's happening extremely fast and dramatically. So we have a number of issues. Upper left photo here, Temple of Doom. Seems very dark, doesn't it? This is actually a newspaper in Sydney, Australia, many years ago, talking about Angkor Wat. And the visitation to Angkor Wat has more than doubled the time this was written. It's very interesting, isn't it, this perspective that one foreign market had that we're treating it so darkly. So this is a topic that's been around for a while. There's a little bit of a cultural difference, I would say, between East and West. East Asians are much more comfortable with the crowd. East Asia had greater population density than the rest of the planet long, long ago. So there's a little bit of a cultural difference. Most Westerners look at some of these photos and just cringe and think, oh my God, I have to stay away from that. And most of my East Asian friends are a little bit more comfortable with it. So there's a little bit of a cultural element too. But I think everybody wants to go to a site and enjoy it without having to elbow your way through to have an experience. So I don't want to get into all the issues of why over-tourism. Most of us in this room have some expertise, but here's one vividly displayed with the growth of discount air carriers creates access to more people. So we got more people traveling, but as Willem Niemeijer, who will join our panel, said on the opening video to this conference, he made the comment that over-tourism is a little bit lazy. We'd like you, Willem, to draw that point out a little bit more from the video. So how do we get more of these people going to other places? One piece of the equation is that I think that at the crowded sites, the visitors all want to go to the iconic places. But maybe they can spend less time at some of the iconic places by visiting other places that are similar to it. So in totality, they kind of get the sense maybe of a cultural site by not spending all their time only at the famous one. But if they went first to a less famous one, so let's say a visitor going to Cambodia, instead of only going to the Angkor Wat complex, they visit some other Khmer sites. There's so many excellent other temples throughout Cambodia, and in Isan district of Thailand, the Khmer Empire was huge. If they visited more of those sites, they gain a more full appreciation of the whole Khmer culture and the architecture and all of that, and then they feel less need that they have to spend so much time at the iconic one. So these are starting with the over-tourism, looking at the crowding with some photos. Oh, come on. We're off to such a good start. There we go. So, this situation has created two faces of tourism. Let me just pull these all up. On the one hand, the dark face, the frowning face. Can you go back one slide, please? This is not letting me go back. There, stop. Just pull up all those bullet points, please. Okay, so the two faces of tourism, the negative impacts of crowding and the positive. But it's not just crowding. You know, overdevelopment, the word crass means not sophisticated, not enjoyable. And along with that comes cultural degradation, environmental issues, pollution, ecological damage, and so forth. Ugliness. But on the positive side, the economic benefits and all the good positive sides of tourism. I'm ready to move forward. Can you press the next slide? Thank you. We'll go through quickly in this, but just a few iconic places. Beijing's Forbidden City, always crowded. Next slide. Next slide, please. Bangkok Royal Palace. I took this photo personally. I think it's pretty representative. I probably could have found a time when every single square meter would be packed with people, but this is pretty representative. It's pretty crowded most of the time without really good visitor flow. Leaving Asia. How about this one? The Louvre Museum in Paris to look at the Mona Lisa. Can everybody in the world go visit the Mona Lisa? Can everybody in the world go visit the Grand Palace in Bangkok? The answer is no. There's just not the capacity. If the Louvre was open 24 hours per day, and you limited each visitor to 10 minutes to have a look at the Mona Lisa, and it was open 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, still everybody in the world today, it would take 300 years to get everybody in. So that's not going to happen. So if we start with the extreme of there's some extreme situations where not everybody can go do something, that helps us understand, I think, the point that we can't all just keep doing all the iconic things. We have to spread it out. Also, what happens then is that in our globalized world, as capacity is added, international brands and international styles come in, and we really lose the sense of place. We've used that term, sense of place, that a location kind of loses its identity. From this scene, do you know where in the world you are? Could be a lot of places, couldn't it? When the architecture looks alike, I think we've lost something in the touristic product. Streets around the world, street scenes start looking alike in our globalized economy. It's not just tourism, but it's just daily life. But as a visitor, as a tourist, this might be a first view of a place. As I get out of the airport and get out to the street scene, it all looks alike. So sense of place is at risk, beauty is at risk, joy is at risk if we're elbowing each other all the way through. So there are many elements to all of this. Now, For some of you in the room, this slide, this presentation is quite old, and for some of you it's new. This is a model. Professor Butler, still alive, presented this in 1980. This tells a story that is extremely relevant to destinations all over the world. What this slide shows, the life cycle of a tourist destination. The concept is really held up over time, over many places in the world, where Professor Butler developed this scheme where he, on a scale of number of tourist visitors on the on the left side, the number of tourist visitors, and on the right, a scale of time. I'm not touching that. So lower left, at the beginning stages of a destination where there are very few visitors, there's a period of development. In the early days, maybe it's just been discovered. We used to say in the old days, not long ago, the old days, backpackers would discover it, but the digital era has transformed that with social media and the power of the information age. It's not just an intrepid backpacker that can find a place. It's much more complex than that with different social groups. But a place sort of gets discovered as an interesting place to visit. And then in the early days, it's just pretty much word of mouth. But then travel writers start picking up on something that's popular, and they popularize it more. The numbers go up. And so Butler calls that, those early stages, exploration, involvement, and then you have this period of development. And the time, you know, it varies from place to place, and the numbers of visitors vary from place to place. But the basic shape of this curve does seem to follow this general pattern. And in the course of development, capacity is added, services come in. Many people might move into the town or the community because of all the economic opportunities. The nature of the community changes. The nature of the experience changes. At some point in time, he calls the consolidation period, where a destination has achieved some level of maturity. A lot of hotels, a lot of tour guides, a lot of restaurants, a lot of infrastructure. And at some point in time, and we never know when this is going to happen, but there is an inflection point where we could continue to grow, whether in numbers or quality of visits, or we can kind of level off, or we can go into decline. And decline could be in terms of numbers of visitors, it could be in terms of the economic benefits per traveler, various types of decline. And there's a huge amount of thought behind all this, and I don't want to spend too much time with it, but to plant the basic idea that this pattern is held up over time. And without proper planning, if we go through the development phase without proper planning, at some point in time, we're probably going to be in trouble. The nature of the destination will change in a way that we cannot control. Because if we have no planning and no control over the development, then where it continues to evolve, you know, if you haven't established control during the development phase, it's pretty hard to regain that. I would say that there are many destinations in the world. There are destinations here in Asia that, you know, have lost their authenticity. They've lost the values and the reasons that visitors went to in the first place. And how do you regain that? It's very difficult to fix what has not been properly planned and properly developed. In this discussion, we're not going to focus so much on how do we fix the places that we think need fixing. In this discussion, we're going to focus on lesser developed destinations that have tremendous potential for economic growth and want to grow. How do you manage for them so that you maintain authenticity, give the visitor a quality experience, but the community feels good about the experience, the visitor feels good about the experience. That's our main theme of what we want to talk about this morning. So that's a very famous slide. It's in virtually every tourism program in academia around the world, heavily used. This one is not so famous because I personally made it because I've never really seen this idea develop so much, and I don't hear a lot discussed about it. So I want to make this point. This slide is completely unscientific. This is just humble me making this to make this point. An individual person has a life cycle of stages of development they go through as a traveler from childhood and through wealth generation and into more time later in retirement. And so does the society. I think this model shows an individual's style of cycle of development and a society's. When a person or a country is not wealthy enough to travel, maybe working 6.5 days per week, and they don't travel very much, when they start getting more wealth and more free time to travel, they kind of go through this development cycle. The first thing you do is you can start go visit family on a Sunday that might be far away or a couple of days away, and you kind of, graduate into different levels. So the early stages might be very close to home things, just to go to some theme parks, casinos nearby, whatever, beaches eventually, and then you kind of go up the scale of length of trip and sophistication of trip. This is a very natural occurrence. With this amazing growth from China in recent years, it's so easy, it's just too easy to stereotype about the Chinese. Huge numbers of them just want to go shop for deluxe goods, because 25 years ago, many of them were not so well off economically. The amazing growth of the Chinese economy means there's millions and millions of people who right now mostly want to shop. If you just put those in your mind as they're going to be shoppers forever, you're wrong. They're going to have enough things in the house in a couple of years. And the Chinese traveler who started traveling 30 years ago and 20 years ago, there's huge numbers of them that we're not paying much attention to, that travel alone, travel in small groups, travel out of way places. And so we need to kind of think about that, is that not only does a destination have a life cycle, a society has a life cycle of outbound travelers, and we do it even within our own lives. So let's not forget that it's all a dynamic process, and we need to develop product for today and tomorrow. So we need to think, everybody talks about quality these days, we're talking about that more and more, which is great to say, but let's kind of give that a little bit of thought here. As we aim for quality, not quantity, please read this and think about the difference of these two scenarios. If you had a choice as a destination manager, promoter, developer, in your community, would you prefer to have scenario A, where you have 10,000 visitors come and spend an average $10 per day, so you've netted 100,000 US dollars. This is just a hypothetical thing, it doesn't say anything about a time frame. Or in that same time frame, you have 500 visitors who spend an average of $200 a day, and the two scenarios bring you the same amount of revenue to your community. Which would you prefer? I think all of us want option B, number 2, right? So why are we so consumed with just counting visitors? Let's get beyond that. That's an entirely too simplistic view. We want to have sustainability, we want responsibility, we want the right customer who respects our community, spends more money with more people. We need to really think about that. The acronym DMO, there's so much confusion in the world. Some people call DMO Destination Management Organization. Mostly it's called Destination Marketing Organization. I've heard a couple of places in the world now that are saying DMMO, because it was always, the M was always marketing, and we've had so little management and so little development, and we're getting some enlightenment in recent years. We have to do both, don't we? We have to do the marketing and we have to do the management. And they have to go together. If we want the right visitor who will spend, in this scenario, $200 a day averaged rather than $10, and I don't want this to be viewed as elitist. This is a little bit of an extreme. More realistic thing might be a comparison of $50 to $80, whatever, but it's a bit extreme to make the point. So we don't want to look at this as an elitist model that we only want wealthy people. The key point here is that we want the right visitor who will come and stay longer at our destination. So this is a per day unit, but there's also just a very important piece of this, is getting the visitor who will stay longer and spend more money. Not only spend more money, but spend more money in more places. Length of stay has to be a real key measure. I think if we summarize everything we try to do with all of our metrics at the destination level, length of stay is the key. If the visitor stays longer, they spread the money around. I mean, think about it. If a visitor comes to your community for a day, they'll go and visit maybe 2 of the things they see at TripAdvisor's top 10 list. And if we only have visitors who come for one day, that top 10 list is all that's visited. Usually the same 2, 3, 4, 5 out of that 10 or whatever. The top 5 benefit tremendously. If they spend 2 days, they might go to 3 or 4 places on the top 10 list. If they spend 4 days, you know, it just gets better and better. You're spreading money out to more places. And with the longer stay, they're not choking the airport. We've got fewer people coming through the system. We've got fewer things to manage. So we have to really break away from this idea. So we're now, you know, in the last few years, we hear all around the world, we want quality tourism, we want quality tourists, but we're still not really seeing a lot of action. And the way to get action is that we marry market research and marketing with development, so that our development speaks to the needs and the desires of the markets that we wish to attract, who are likely to stay long, whether that's by nationality, that's by age, it's by interest type, soft adventure travel, cultural tourism, whatever it is. We need to know what it is. We need to have a strategy, and then we develop for that, those top groups that we want to attract, and we market to those top groups. So let's please move beyond just pure counts. Of course, it's just natural to start, you know, using the statistic of how many people are visiting us. That's fine. I don't, you know, I use it myself. It's a very good starting point to understand what's going on at a place. But we have to move quickly beyond that to look at some other metrics. And my personal favorite is length of stay as a key indicator of sustainability at the destination. So here's to summarize the points, that the longer stay increases expenditure per visitor, but it also lessens overcrowding and disperses the spending over to more people in the community. I think the remote control wants you to absorb that slide. Okay, so let's think about some solutions, and I don't want to steal from our expert panel, but I'm going to throw a few ideas out. Here's an idea for length of stay. Jeju Island in Korea is an island province. Interesting place. The only place in the world with the triple hit of UNESCO designation: World Heritage Site, Biosphere, and Geopark. Right? Yeah, thank you. And they do very well in tourism. And I really like this example because I want to make this point. Quite often, planners are thinking, how do we get the visitor not only to stay longer, but just to keep spending money at every hour of the day? Here's an example where at Jeju Island, they have this wonderful trail network that circles the island, and it's in nice segments. And so many visitors come to hike the trail. So as they develop this trail, their length of stay has increased, and all sorts of other good things have happened. So as you increase the length of stay, and they're hiking around, restaurants and hotels and bed and breakfasts in different locations are benefiting from it. Sometimes I think planners think, well, but they're not spending money when they're hiking. Well, if the hiking brought them to the island and stay longer, they're still eating lunch and eating dinner and staying in a hotel. So the receipts, the tax receipts, the income to the community is increased. And so this is an idea that I really wanted to implant, is that we don't have to just develop constantly something that's pulling money out of their pocket every minute. Here's a successful campaign that gives the nature lover a wonderful experience that people are pleased with, a lovely experience, but it gives the community more money because people stay longer for these day hikes. So don't look at everything has to be a development piece that directly brings money. There's all sorts of good things you can do in the public sphere to bring money more indirectly by extending the stay. Willem's going to speak later. He and I kind of crafted this specific idea at a CBT village in Cambodia of adding to the product line of homestays a luxury tent, so that a homestay village with a CBT setup that had been operating for several years suddenly had two products, two very different price points to sell. This kind of innovation of thinking of mixing up the product set in a different place is just one idea I just want to tease up here. Celebrating and displaying authenticity. So we've got a friend from UNESCO who'll be talking about these issues, and I just want to put this one out there. When you come in and out of places like Suvarnabhumi Airport in Bangkok, I'm in and out of there all the time, and I never pass the big cultural displays, the big tug of war after you've gone through, you've arrived into the departure area after immigration. I've never walked past that without seeing many visitors taking photographs. This first impression and last impression at Suvarnabhumi, or here in Bali at the airport, you've got a sense of place. And then in a traffic circle in a town or city, if inside the traffic circle there's a monument that's something about cultural, and people see that. So this is something for destination planners. I just want to throw this idea out for further discussion. Having those cultural displays, giving a sense of place, very different from the scenes earlier of the streets of all the international brands. So if you have a few of these things planted here and there in the streets and the airport and so forth, displaying your culture and authenticity constantly reminds people. Back to Jeju, another side of this. So I've talked about the Ole Trail and Jeju of development that doesn't directly bring money in, but it does it indirectly, the idea of authenticity, creating a sense of place. On the environmental side, where you can really distinguish your destination, is start setting some targets for development. Now, so here Jeju has this master plan from the year 2015 to 2030 to go carbon-free in their transport, very aggressive. But if you really study this and think about it, it's manageable. And this, don't look at this as a more developed country. I think the technology now supports it, that this is manageable practically anywhere, because all the major automobile producers all over the world now are creating electric vehicles. And the unit price just keeps coming down and down and down. So what they've said at Jeju is that they want to have 100% eco-friendly electric generation, and then that supports transport that's electric driven. So they started in 2015, and they did the manageable thing of say, we'll start ourselves, all of our government agents and all the agencies of our provincial government must use an electric vehicle, and I've personally seen it in the parking area of government offices in Jeju. They've got the charging station, and they've got several electric cars. And then they give the industry a pre-competitive notice that by 2020, they want all rental cars to be electric. Now, they started this in 2015. I mean, in most places in the world, all the cars for hire, all the rental cars, they're getting new cars every few years anyway. So whatever the local market can bear, if you set out a target, 7 years, 5 years, whatever it is, and it's pre-competitive, they all have to do it. So the rental car companies have known now for 4 years that they need to do this, right? And then the rest of the island, they said, you have 15 years. And so that kind of setting targets and that kind of leadership on the environmental side. If you work on all of these things, a development that strategically keeps the client there longer, if you work on authenticity and culture, you work on these environmental issues with long-term planning, you can make meaningful progress. So let's wrap this around to the GSTC criteria. I'm pulling up my favorite criterion of all. Those of you who know me well know this one always comes up. That when you look at everything that we have in the GSTC criteria on a destination being managed sustainably, it cannot happen if we don't have the proper management structure in place. And we don't formally weight the GSTC criteria, but we believe very strongly that in this one, A2 says that the destination management should not be by one department. This is not a threat to the Department of Tourism in your municipality or your province. What we're saying not is that you should completely share power and budget. What this criterion is saying is that those destination managers who manage best do it in a holistic way, that they engage other agencies within the government. They know they're not alone. Department of Tourism knows they need to rely heavily on the planning from the Transport Division and from education and all different government agencies. So it's very important at the highest levels of municipal or provincial government are on board with this, because it has to be a whole government holistic approach. Further, government must engage private sector in a meaningful way, and it becomes a true partnership. And I really want to draw this out from our panel, too, of examples of how there can be public and private engagement and so forth. So this criterion, again, is not meant to be a threat to say to a government, give up your power. This says, invite key stakeholders to the decision-making process and the development and planning process, because if you truly engage your stakeholders and you really learn from the private sector what they can sell, what their needs are, you're going to manage the destination so much better. We really kind of track this one and look for good case studies around the world. And honestly, we have all too few. But we believe passionately that those few, we have sort of a top 20 list, and it's no coincidence there's a direct relationship between those destinations in the world that do this well and have success in the marketplace. Because if there's anything you learn about sustainable tourism, is that it's all complex, we all need help, we all need partnership, and this criterion should be a guideline for true and proper partnership. And just to, this slide is going to show on the key functions of what that A2 Council does, that it's coordinating a holistic approach. So it engages marketing, it's monitoring elements, it's building public-private relationships. The public sector is turning to trade associations and others. And it's assistance to help member businesses become sustainable. We've talked a lot about training and awareness, and this is a big role that the government, the public sector can play too, is help organize workshops to help train people, not only within their own staff, but in the private sector. So, that's enough for me. Let's start hearing from some of our other experts. What we'll do here is we have a panel of 4, and 2 of them have PowerPoints, and the other 2 don't. We're going to start kindly with Willem Niemeijer and then Neeracha. And so Willem and Neeracha, I'd like you to come up one by one, and then we'll pull up the others for a panel and remain. So if I could introduce the president of Yaana Ventures, which is a holding company of a number of business types that operates throughout Southeast Asia, a number of brands, and a very progressive company. And you saw Willem in the opening video yesterday morning talking about overtourism. So Willem Niemeijer of Yaana Ventures, please.
All right, good morning. You think that's better? Okay, let's try this then. All right, good morning. Well, first of all, I'd like to congratulate this whole conference by using not the plastic little bags to put your badge in. Next week, I'll be at the ITB, and I'm pretty sure it's the biggest, I think it's the biggest travel trade show in the world. I'm pretty sure it will still have the plastic things for thousands of delegates to come in and the visitors to come in and have their badge in. It's pretty ridiculous because we can do it like this just as good, right? So I'll make a point to use the lanyard, reuse the lanyard at the ITB next week and talk about that. So let me start by my presentation with a little personal story that has to do with the slide that's on right now. And it brings me back to 1996 when I was on the back of a motorbike, thank you so much, in southern Laos on a dirt road, and it was raining very heavily, as it does in southern Laos. And I was brought by my friend, later on family member, to this wonderful spot that he said, you have to go and see this. This is really beautiful. This is like, it's the middle of nowhere, it's a beautiful waterfall. So I've seen my share of waterfalls already at that time in Asia. I was like, okay, well, bring me there. So about 45 minutes, totally soaking wet, hobbling down, and I don't see anything. There's fog going about, and I can hear a waterfall. I step out, and the mist lifted for a moment, and there are the twin waterfalls of Tat Phan in southern Laos. There's nobody there. There's nothing there. There's not even, well, the village is fairly close by, but it's very tiny. It's maybe 4 or 5 different houses. So I come there and I think, man, wouldn't this be good to have a resort here, to have kind of like a lodge here? This is absolutely beautiful. People have to see this. So I spent 3 years at that time to get appropriate permits in Laos. That is already now, that is a problem, but in the 90s it was even a bigger problem. I did get a foreign investment license, and a couple of years later, in 1999, we opened the very remote located Tat Phan resort. So I felt like, oh, this is wonderful. We have this beautiful view of beautiful waterfall, absolutely gorgeous here. You can get there from Pak Se, you can get there from Ubarachstani in northeastern Thailand, and people will come because I built it. 5 years later, we got maybe an average annual occupancy rate of 25%, and we are losing money hand over fist. Labor of love, so to speak. So that's kind of sets a little bit the story, the rest of my presentation, and I will come back to Tat Phan and how things have changed even from the late 90s to what they are now. Right, so developing less known destinations while protecting authenticity. This is basically what we do with all our ventures under the Yaana umbrella, so to speak. This is a photo of a product that we do with Kiri Travel. It's the longest standing venture that we have. We celebrated 25 years last year. And what we're trying to do here is getting our travelers to connect with the locals. It dawned on us that while our travelers are with us on tour, they always have to eat, right? They have to eat lunch, in particular when they are on a tour with us. We usually provide them lunch. And where we do lunch is normally in restaurants. But restaurants are fairly formal places, and in particular if they start to get more tourists, it becomes less personal, much more about the transaction rather than the interaction. So we thought, well, what about if we do a picnic lunch? And we set up a picnic lunch, and we let that picnic lunch being cooked and hosted by locals. People have to eat anyway. They'll be outside. We do this in a spot that is of some cultural or natural importance or significance, and it's been a fantastic product. We do this in all our destinations. We have 7 destinations throughout Southeast Asia. Oops, why is it goes back? Right. In my presentation, I want to talk about 3 different subjects. There's a lot to talk about. Randy this morning already touched on a number of points that I will approach either the same topic but a little bit differently, or just new products. But basically, I want to talk about 3 different things. Visitor dispersion, that really is an important part for, in particular, Southeast Asia, I would say, where we are in, and probably in other areas in the world as well, other continents as well. I want to talk about the initiators of change, the real innovators, because that has changed. It is not like it is before. And finally, I want to talk about the challenges and the risks of all of this, of visitor dispersion and changing where we go as tourism. Keeps on doing this. Okay, forward. Thank you. So, first of all, and Rennie already mentioned this morning, we all know in this room the problem of overtourism. We've all seen it, and this is something that is not going to go away. It's going to get more and more. Of recently, there have been a number of very high publicized stories about areas in Southeast Asia. There's been Maya Bay at Phi Phi Island. There's been closed off for tourists. It remains to be closed off for tourists because they've noticed that the moment that they closed it down, nature came back quite rapidly. Sharks came back, and tourists can see it from a distance, but not go to the beach anymore. Another example has been Boracay in the Philippines that has been closed off for travelers for about, I think it was half a year, a little bit over half a year, and recently reopened. There has to be very, very good management, but the issue is that these places already exist. And the infrastructure already exists, so this picture here is on Patong Beach. It's basically, you can say it's too late. All the hotels are there. There's economic importance of this to stay as it is. It can probably become a little bit better managed, but the fact is that there are a lot of tourists has already been put in place. So it's a bit of a warning sign, basically, for how we develop new places to go to. Right, so, and that came up in the presentation of Rennie as well, the Mona Lisa. So we go from Thailand, the land of smiles, to the most famous smile in the world, which is indeed in the Louvre. But I have a little of a different take on it, and I want to compare the two destinations, Thailand and France. It's kind of an interesting comparison because the two countries are around about the same size. Both in land size and in population, they're around about the same. Not completely, but close enough. Whenever I go to talk to our clients or our potential clients with Kiri Travel, and they talk about our 7 different destinations that we handle, like Sri Lanka, Indonesia, Laos, and Cambodia, Vietnam, Myanmar, Thailand always gets a bit, well, Thailand, it's very touristy. That's basically how it is. It's actually pretty hard for us as a experiential travel company to sell Thailand as a destination because it's being seen as touristy. Now, if you talk about France, nobody talks about France as a touristy destination. They may talk about the Eiffel Tower, or maybe seeing the Mona Lisa as a touristy experience at that particular moment, but not France as a destination. And that is because France is, first of all, being much longer at having tourists in their destination, but also being, well, because they're much longer at it, they have spread tourists throughout their country. If you go to any of the larger trade shows, like for example the ITB next week, and you go to the booth of France, they will have every single province represented. And each province will have many, many places and things to do in their destination. So they spread their tourists throughout the country. You go to Thailand, and it's a whole different thing. They will talk about the places that are already very well known. So there's a handful of that. It's always about the beach places, Samui, Phuket, Pattaya. It's about Bangkok, obviously. And if it's very, very adventurous, it's about Chiang Mai. So there's a real difference in how DMOs and countries look at tourism development. I want to go forward and see if that will work. No, it will go backwards. Right, so that's also to do with perceived highlights, as I like to call them. This slide's Myanmar. On the right-hand side is Bagan. This is a famous place to see the sunset, which basically by now is an iconic photo of Myanmar. It's the plain of Bagan with all the temples on it. So people crowd to this temple to get that view. There have already been accidents of tourists falling down from the temple because there are no security measures or anything like that. And this is Myanmar. There are very few tourists going to Myanmar, especially right now, but even on their heydays. So why do we all go to this temple? And why don't we go to, for example, Neeracha, which is on the left side, which I would say that everybody would see, arguably, that is the more interesting one in this photo, in this comparison. Because that has to do with people want to go to the highlights. They want to see what they have read about. They want to see, they want to confirm what other people have seen already before that. It's very difficult to get people away from highlights. I know Peak Adventures here, they're kind of like, we're trying to do the same thing, and it's difficult. You want to get people to Thailand, and by getting people to Thailand to not go to Chiang Mai, it's very difficult. Sending to Laos and not going to Luang Prabang is very, very difficult. Even though you kind of know the experience is not what people actually expect. Again, I'm trying to get forward, but let's see how that goes. Right, so that brings me to the people that lead change and that try to get people in other, tourists in other destinations. This obviously is our own, together with the Niemeijer Group and together with Wildlife Alliance. We have built a lodge in western Cambodia, in the jungle, helping protect 18,000 hectares of lowlands rainforest. So we are part of that. Again, trying to go forward, but it doesn't. So here's the same slide that Randy had before. It's indeed of Professor Butler, 1980s. And I want to talk about this in a different fashion that Randy did before. I want to talk about the start point, the exploration and involvement, because that has been changing a lot since the 1980s when Butler came up with it, and in particular now. And I would say even changed quite a lot since I built a Tat Phan resort in the late 90s. And the big difference here has been the internet. Whereas before, backpackers were probably the first ones to start and create interest in a certain area, that is no longer the point. This has been taken over by others. Possibly, I would say right now that the first phase is actually already in the development phase. It's quite different. The involvement and exploration is being done by entrepreneurs, by the innovators, by the early movers, but by companies, by, I would say, by and large, by tourism for good. Want to go forward again? It doesn't go. There we go. So I want to go in 2 slides to a couple of these innovators to illustrate my point here on those that make a destination, that kickstart a destination, and these are definitely not backpackers. So in this slide there is the Muang La resort. It's right. No, sorry. This is Nihi and Sumba in Indonesia. Niewatu, it's a lodge that I think charges something like over $1,000 a night. There's the Muang La resort in northern Laos. It's far north of Luang Prabang towards the Vietnamese border. They're the only ones there. Our own cardamom tented camp. It's in the middle of the jungle. We help protect. So all of these are examples on first movers, and they are not backpackers. Again, trying to go forward. Here are a couple of more. There's our neighbors, more or less, at Cardamom Tented Camp, Shintamani Wild. They are in the other part of the Cardamom Tented Camp. They charge $1,800 a night, and you have to stay minimum 3 nights, so definitely not backpackers. There's the Wa'ale Resort in the Mergui Archipelago in Myanmar. Very, very exclusive, very well done. There's the Song Sa Resort in Cambodia. Before they opened up, they had marine biologists working there on the reef for about 2 years before they even started constructing. So, and our own little lodge in Khao Sok, couldn't resist a little plug there. So these are not driven by backpackers. So they may use the whole change in what I talked about earlier, the idea that travelers want to see, want to give back, tourism for good. It's all very, very important. The point of is basically being made here, like $200, 500 travelers on $200 is better than 10,000 backpackers on $10 a day. Right, so to the end of this presentation, because we have more presenters to listen to, I want to talk a little bit about the challenges that all of these innovators face, and all of them do. And they have to do, it comes back to those early days with Tat Phan resort when we built it. It is not, we build it and they will come. You wish, but it isn't like that. You need a lot of support. Either that or you need very deep pockets. Either that or you become very frustrated, like in the early 2000s when I had Tat Phan. It's difficult to move people away from highlights or perceived highlights. It's very, very difficult. You need to have a lot of support. And there's probably more in that, what we need. Because we need to find a way to fight what you will find as a traveler when you Google your destination. So I made this presentation early this morning. So this is the latest Google updates that you will get. If you type in Myanmar, this is what you will see. And if you type in Cambodia, this is what you will see. You type in any destination in Southeast Asia at the very least, and only the things you see are the major highlights. And this has to do with the way that Google and the internet these days work. Social media is much the same. It works in a way that it's obviously, Google isn't free, as we all know. Google has to do with who pays the advertisements. Who pays the advertisements? It's in the travel industry, it's the Booking.coms and the large OTAs. And where would they make their money? It's by booking large hotels. Where are the large hotels? They're the places where the highlights are. So basically you have a self-perpetuating problem of the only thing that people will see if they try to find out something about the destination is self-confirming the highlights in the place where you are. So this is why you see the temples in Bagan. This is where people go, and they will not go to Merauke because there's no place of Merauke here. They all want to see that. You remember that temple where all the people were on? Well, that's what you see there. That's the highlight where the balloons are. That is what you will see. And the Temple of Doom, right? So when you go to Angkor, you'll see Angkor Wat. So basically that's what you want to see. So that's what we need to fight. And even if you charge $1,800 a night as a resort, you don't have the power to change this. So to get the attention to a new place, like what we have to do, what trying to do for example, in the Cardamom Mountains, in helping to preserve 18,000 hectares of forest. And there's a little view from the helicopter where we go between the different concessions. Actually, it's kind of interesting. The 18,000 hectares that we try to and are actually succeeding to protect. On this side, as you can see, that's the broccoli, that is where the rainforest is. And here's the border of the concession, where the concession is an economic concession, and all the trees are gone. So in order to get tourism for good working, we really need to get the attention on what these things are doing. So this is Cardamom Tented Camp, but the same could be said for any of the other examples that I gave earlier in this presentation. So I'll just try to click onto this. So what we need, well, from everybody involved, I would say the public sector is involved, but I would say if somebody can whisper this to the good folks at Google, that would help as well. We need to be able to promote ourselves. We need to work on, that's the next thing, on capacity building. This is very difficult. If you are somewhere in the boondocks, in the outskirts, if you're in the Cardamom Mountains, or you're in the Mergui Islands in Myanmar, where do you get skilled staff that speak English? Where do you get staff that know about hospitality? We need to have capacity building going on forward. Try to go forward, and we'll go backward. Yeah. So have some patience here. I guess. Can somebody put this forward on the, just put it on all the time, because this still takes too long. Okay, we need zoning, very, very important, from the beginning onwards. And I think what is being done currently is entrepreneurs come first, which is good. I'm an entrepreneur, I'm trying to do that. But it might be good for DMOs to actually be the first one to say, listen, this is where we want to, this area want to have to natural conservation or cultural conservation. This is where you can build. So that you don't have this mistake that is being made in Southeast Asia all over again in every place. It's like it goes over to land ownership and then goes to development and overdevelopment, like the slide I showed you of Patong Beach. So give some space. Make sure that that there is free space at the beach area before you allow entrepreneurs to build there. Zoning is very important. We need infrastructure. Infrastructure to get travelers to get to these other places, to get to these new highlights, to spread out, to do visitor dispersion. And finally, we need to have a bit of an incentive. The examples that I mentioned before to you of entrepreneurs, this will continue to go. We certainly have plans to do much more development in remote areas, but it would be helpful if there's an incentive to do so, and if there's an incentive not to build another hotel in Chiang Mai or in Luang Prabang or in Bagan. There's incentives to do that, actually. It's easy to get a bank loan if you get a piece of land in Luang Prabang or if you have a piece of land in Chiang Mai. If you have a piece of land out in, if it is Thailand in Mahasarakam, you will not get a bank loan to do a tourism project. So incentives by governments are going to be very important as well. So with that, I go backwards and then forwards to the final slides. I want to thank very much GSTC to give me the opportunity to speak to you. Thank you.
Yeah, have a seat over there where you can see the screen. Yeah. Thank you, Willem. Excellent presentation. Thank you very much. Some interesting perspectives on financial side and promotional side. This topic is all very universal and global, but there's not too many places in the world that I think could benefit from this discussion more than the region we're in Southeast Asia. And especially here in northern Thailand. I think of places like Nan, Loei, and Isan. Thailand has tremendous potential. The whole northern half of the country has tremendous potential. So our next speaker, Kun Neeracha, is going to talk about northern Thailand, a lot about Loei. She wears many hats. She's a tour operator, but she's here in her capacity as the president of the Thai Ecotourism and Adventure Travel Association. TEATA? So Kun Neeracha, please. presentation, and I'm going to sit off to the side, and we'll bring the others up later. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. สวัสดีค่ะ Good morning, everyone. Okay. Well, good morning, everyone, again. My name is Neeracha Wongmasa. As Randy give the brief introduction about me, today I'm going to be a speaker under my hat of TEATA. Who knows TEATA? I guess not. Oh, yes. Thank you. Yeah, because Peak DMC is one of the members of TEATA. All right. So today, as we are just like, we all are worried about OT, right? Over-tourism. This is the key thing. So that's why TEATA has been working a lot with the communities and the destinations in the less known area. This is the key point. So who's TEATA? So I might have to ask the audience down there who just raised the hand that you know TEATA. So TEATA is I have to say, we stands for Thai Ecotourism and Adventure Travel Association. So this is a very long name though, but we have been there for over 20 years already in the market, in the industry. And of course we are the national body and we are the non-profit organization. And of course, just like I said, at the moment, we have about 70 members. It's not that much, right, when we are talking about 70 members. But all the members, we are fighting for the same thing, sustainable tourism. Okay. Well, I have to say today, I bring you a case study of Loi. So actually, TEATA has been doing so many projects in other provinces in Thailand as well, but today I want to raise this key point in Loi. And today I'm very glad as well because we have a governor of Loi who is here today this morning as well. It's really my honor to introduce him. He's the guy in the front. So normally when we get to any province, right, we just have the governor. In Thailand, we call a father. So he's the father, my father, because today I am the resident of Loi. Even I was born in Bangkok, but I just like moved my ID card over there. So let me just like give the brief introduction about TEATA work because we have been working for Loi for almost 5 years actually. Well, for the people who don't really know Loi is, I have to say, the location of Loi is very perfect though. It's very easy to get there. So if you haven't been there, it's very easy. From Bangkok, it's only 500 kilometers away. Not that much. It's not wow. Because, the road to get to Loi is very easy. It will take you like 6 to 7 hours only. But if you drive from Bangkok straight, you can either pass through the northern part, because like the place where I am, I'm running the hotel, which is like the Green Hotel in Loi, but the location is in Ban Sai. So that is another district, right? So normally I don't use the main road to get from Bangkok to Loi. I just use like another road to get there. So it's like about 5 or 6 hours from there. So I have to say it's very easy, and you can either drive there by car or you can go bus over there. And even you, because today we have so many flights a day. You can take Nok Air or you can take Air Asia as well. And also, of course, you can go by train. We don't have the train station at the moment, but you can just like go by train to the Udon Thani or Nong Khai. And then from there, you take the bus again. So it's very easy to get there. And like I said before, I have to say Loi is also the gateway to everywhere. For example, if you want to go to Luang Prabang, You know, right? It's very easy because from our border, we have the international border over there to cross to Luang Prabang. It's only I have to say, like, it's exactly 363 kilometers away to get to Luang Prabang. And you can enjoy the drive because, like, the scenery from Leh border to get to Luang Prabang, I just say, like, it's really amazing. So I just want to invite you guys over there. And also, like I said, we also the gateway if you want to go to Hanoi, Vientiane, or China as well, you can just like exit from Leh. For us, we just feel like being in Leh, we have a very good connection to everywhere as well. Because if you, from Leh, if you want to go to the beach, it's not so far because you just like have to take the flight back to Bangkok and then another 1 or 2 hours to get to Pattaya already. So when we see the area itself, we just feel like the connecting to every main cities in Thailand is not difficult from Leh. I think you all are familiar with this because we have the showcase out there as well, right? TEATA Kon. I'm sure that everyone here knows about TEATA Kon because now it's the international well-known festivals. So it's held once a year. I cannot tell you exactly the date because, you know, this is really amazing because I will just like talk about this later, but I cannot tell you exactly the date because we cannot put in the calendar because this is the belief of the local people. So you get to know the dates once, you know, I have to say the ancestor, our spirits of ancestor tell us when it is exactly for that year. Isn't it amazing? I think this is the thing that we consider ourselves something that is very unique. So TEATA Kon Festival is the mass festival. Normally it's held in June or July of the year. It's held in Ban Sai, where I have my hotel. And also you can see this is the characteristic of Leh. We consider ourselves like we are very colorful in ethnic groups because we also have ethnic people and we also have the minority people called Thai Dam. So Thai Dam migrate from Dien Bien Phu, so Vietnam. So that's why I just want to address like Leh is very full of colors of ethnic people. Well, I forget to mention one thing. This is very important because it's the only festival in the world as well. You can see down there on the left-hand side at the bottom, this is the Flower Festival. I can just say like, you know, for the Flower Festival, I've been traveling a lot actually myself to more than 120 countries in the world. I haven't seen any festival like this before. You know, because during the festival, the villagers will just like build a bamboo structure and put all the fresh flowers on it. And not only that, they put the light by the candles. So they put millions of candles on the flower tree. So this is really amazing. So I would like to invite all of you to be there for this festival. It's in April. Okay, and Leh, of course. Leh is the place where we have to say, like I told you before, it's the place for the unique spiritual wonders. Why? Because you see the guy down there on the first photo. This guy we call Chao Po Guan. So Chao Po Guan, he's the spiritual leader. You know Dalai Lama, right? He's exactly just like Dalai Lama. Because, you know, the villagers or the local people listen to him more than the governor. I'm sorry. No, but this is the truth, actually. You know, because like the local people, when they want to do anything, they want to get wedding, they want to consult about the problems in life, they go to this guy. So this guy, you know, it's not just like someone, but normally our spiritual leader, I mean the ancestor, selected him. So just like Dalai Lama. So this is the thing that we are considering ourselves as the place for the strong, at the press to have the very strong belief and in animism and also yes, okay. All right, so I'll go very fast on this one actually. So this is a very important page though for the what we have done in Loei, because this is the design process that we are working for the rural area actually. So at first we just have to do the market studies, since you know already that most members of TEATA, we are the tour operators. We know our clients, we know our requirements from our clients. So we do a market study for all the requirements, and we also compare with the global trend. So when we get that requirements, right, next we have to do the feasibility. So we have gone to every single details, every single products and services available in the market at the moment. And we just did the feasibility survey on that, and we put the mark on the score as well. We just give the score from 0 to 5. This is the way that we just like put the measurement on the products and services. So next, what we have to do is like, we just have to decide the route. This is very important. Because after we get all the products, right, we just see like, okay, the products with 5 and 4 scoring, those are, of course, should be in the products. And for 0 and 1, of course, we just like leave it later. We can develop it later. So we just decide all the routes, and then you see later what are they. And then later, we just have to do the capacity building for suppliers. This is very important. So we do a lot of hands-on technology training, and we use our own SSMS criteria, which is very close to GSTC as well, because we use the GSTC standard to be the master. And then also we do the synergy training in order to put them together, because connection is very important. So lastly, we just have to test the products, since we are the tour operators. So we have to test our products, and last but not least, of course, we have to do marketing. Because whatever we design, whatever we do, if we cannot sell, that is the end. So this is the last thing, but it's the most important. So I'll go very quick on this one as well. This one I'm talking about the main components of the green route in Loei. So we always just think about this word, themes and essence. You know why? Because this is the thing that we are thinking about, the right mixture of the products. So you will see later how we separate the routes by using the themes and essence. And also the sustainability highlights on the products and services. And as you can see, like we also put the component on the communities with authentic culture, tradition, and ways of life. And we have to use a lot of storytelling and also local wisdom in this. And culture exchange always happens during our work. And of course, we cannot go over the innovation and creativity and eco-friendly. So these are the main components that we use in order to design the green routes over there. So these are some photos actually, because I don't want to put my presentation slide too long, so I just put them together. You can see like there were a lot of works over there that we have been doing with Loei, the less known destination, and this one as well. So this is like what we come out. We just call it 6+2, very easy. 6 is for the inbound market, and 2 is for domestic market. So those programs, you can see we use essence and themes in order to separate them. And we also try to separate the routes into different areas. This is very important. So we can cover most of Loei. This is the way to solve OT, or overtourism. So this is the example. You can see the route. Like for this one, we just use the theme of the colors of Mekong tribal cultures. So you can see like we just do it in Tali. Tali is very less known district in Loi. So we put the focus in there. And also we do it in Chiang Khanh as well. Chiang Khanh is so famous now, but still it's still very less known though when we compare for the whole Thailand. So this is the first theme. And the second route is living legacy of local life in Loi. So you can see this one, we put the Pitakon mask painting over there. It's in Dan Sai, and we also add the Tali as well. And we have also in Sijalon, but in Sijalon, in Puluang district, this one will be on the next one as well, on this one. So this one is in the theme of Kitchen of the Lost World. Oh, this is, by the title, is very amazing though. Because you know why? You can see the right top photo over there. The villagers, they cook everything in bamboos. So we use bamboo to cook rice, to cook meat, and our tourists, they enjoy that though. And also we have like the local chef, I have to say they are villagers, and they're so happy to work with tourists. And they are probably present their products, and we develop together with them. So this is like another route, Kitchen of the Lost World. Okay, and this is like the route in my town, in Dan Sai. So over there, I have to say why we create the biking route. The local people there, they enjoy biking, and you will be very surprised though. We have so many mountain bikes over there, not the cheap one. You know why? Because we are doing the quality tourism. So we also force tourists to have the helmets over there because, you know, I have to say in Loi, we have the slogan for our province, that Loi is the land of the seas of mountains. That's why it's very difficult to find a flat land. So most of the land are like hills and mountains everywhere. That's why, you know, to do the biking there is very fantastic, and it's going to be a wonderful experience though. All right, so this is another one, the one that I just talked about, the Flower Festival, because it is in Nahel. Nahel is the least, I think I have to say it's the least known district in Loi, but it's my favorite though. Even I live in Dan Sai because over there is really a place in the hidden place of the world. But you have everything over there. People are very innocent, and on the Buddhist day, they never eat any animals. So even the eggs. So that is some place that, you know, I really would like to invite all of you to be there in Hell. And this is another route for volunteerism. So you can see, like, we have been working with many remote schools. I have to say, like, even so far at the moment, we develop so more programs, those schools. So this is the program that we can do over there as well. And this is almost last though. We use this concept, Loi Go Green, and we go together with that. So thank you very much for listening to my presentation. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Please come and have a seat. And if I could call up our other two panelists, Mike Stewart with Peak DMC and Mrs. Hanh from UNESCO Bangkok. Let's all come and take seats here together at the table. Thank you very much for that. Yeah, if you could just kind of gather. No, it's okay. Yeah. So next we're going to hear from my friend Mrs. Hanh from UNESCO Bangkok. We worked together in Vietnam on some development projects, and she's going to tell us about UNESCO perspectives on managing for authenticity in tourism. So please, share your thoughts.
Thank you, Randy. Thank you for inviting me to participate in this panel. Very thoughtful and provoking presentations that we just heard. I have a couple of confessions to make before I kind of give a few thoughts. First, I feel very naked without beautiful slides on the back of myself, as our previous speakers had had. And the second confession is I'm not really an expert in tourism. As you might know, UNESCO is the cultural education and sciences organization, and tourism is quite a small focus of our organization. And a lot of that we are doing coming from the perspective of safeguarding heritage. As you know, that we have a number of conventions that promotes the safeguarding of intangible cultural heritage, tangible heritage, a series of World Heritage that I think you are very familiar with. So actually we have a sustainable tourism program sitting within the World Heritage Center with a very much as a starting point is to ensure that the World Heritage that have been inscribed in the heritage list are being protected in the wave of tourism, which has happened very often than not, that after a site that had been inscribed in the World Heritage List, and you will automatically see a very rapid increase in the number of tourism arrival. And then in UNESCO, we also, as an UN agency, we are also very much focusing on the contributing to the achievement of sustainable development goals. And for that, we can also see that sustainable tourism bring a very good angle to improve the livelihoods of the community, to create a social intercultural dialogue and exchanges. And so that's really how we approach tourism within our organization. And the work of us in the tourism takes a two-pronged approach. First, we work closely with site managers of these World Heritage sites, over 1,000 sites now in the whole world, to properly manage the site. And within that aspect, visitor management is a very important aspect. So we work with site managers or organizing capacity building activities to help sites to develop management plans, visitor management plans to control the visitors in site. And then a series of work that we have been doing is to develop this lesser known, maybe it falls into this context, but then a lot of that would be satellite sites around the World Heritage, because that is one way that we see it can be effective. If it can be effectively done, it will prolong the stay as very important points that for tourism, sustainable tourism that Randy had mentioned, but also to diverge the concentration on the core zones of the World Heritage Site, and also to link the lesser known World Heritage Sites with the more well-known World Heritage Sites. So I have a couple of examples that I can talk about what we did in Vietnam. Randy was very much involved in this initiative. So probably, as you know, in Quang Nam province in the central Vietnam, not far from Da Nang, there's a very well-known site called Hoi An. Lots of very many visitors go there. It's getting very busy. And then only about an hour away, there's My Sơn. There's hardly anyone go there. Well, we have the visitor to Hoi An for about 2-3 million a year, and then in My Sơn we have about 200,000. And it's a very easy trip. It's like an hour. You can go by many bus tours. You can take a motorbike. We can even take boats. And when we start looking into the situation, and there are some simple things that you can fix. Like, for example, when we talk to tour operators, they said that we only go there in the morning. And that's another thing in My Sơn, that is heavily crowded in the morning. And then in the afternoon, there's nobody. Of course, I mean, you see the sun, you see the heat and things in the afternoon is not as attractive in the morning. But then one simple reason that the tour operators told us why they don't take their tours in the morning is because in the afternoon is because they said in the afternoon there's no music show organized. So there's not enough things for their tourists to do. So a simple thing, we talked to the site managers who organize this music show as part of their welcoming, and they start opening a couple of shows in the afternoon. And then, so by that, just very simple action. You have more tourists to come to Mission, and then also you have less people who go in the morning because now people also have an option to go in the afternoon as well. So that serves the purpose of having tourists there. And then another initiative that we work in Quang Nam is in Chiem Tay village, which is just across the river from Hoi An town. It's a 15 minutes boat ride. Very beautiful village, agricultural, very traditional Vietnamese village. But there's nobody who went there. And then a lot of the youth who are originally from that village, as soon as they start at the working age, they move to Hoi An, they move to Ho Chi Minh City because there's nothing to do in that village. And so we start working with the local residents on how they wanted to build their village. And so this is another point that I would like to make is as we mentioned in the beginning, tourism has never really been our starting point. So when we start working in Chiem Tay, we don't raise a question when we start having all these conversation with local villagers. We don't ask them the question, what do they want? What do you want to do for tourists? How do you want to turn this into a tourist destination? We ask them a question, how would you want to turn this village into a livable village where local youth don't have to move away for job opportunities? What kind of things that you would like to see happenings? So they talk about they wanted a cultural house, they want a library, they want a sports center. They talk about all these things, and then we help them start working with those things and then start making Chiem Tay to be a more livable place for the people. And then we document on the intangible cultural heritage that they have in the place, and we talk about how do you want to safeguard this heritage. And then we are, okay, so now if we want to maybe have a side job of maybe opening some tourism businesses in the village. So what kinds of things do you think that can be shown to tourists? And then they can start talking about, okay, maybe this is a good thing, tourists might want to see, that might be a good thing, and then they start organizing themselves into these different groups of homestay and local guides and so like that. So I think that that's a really good way to go when we put the local residents in the central stage of the place, and we turn the place into the place that they want to be. And then tourism, they would come, and that would be more of the side effect. Of course, I mean, maybe you would not like me very much for saying that because you're already the tourism sector, but like again, I'm coming from a more cultural heritage safeguarding perspective. Cultural resources definitely is a very good assets that can be turned into tourism goods and services. Maybe I don't need to elaborate on that anymore because like the example from Loy had given an excellent example of how local cultural resources can be mobilized to attract tourists. But then I would also like to point out to contemporary cultural expressions. When we talk about cultural products, we like to talk about traditional thing, like something that has been practiced for generations. But then in UNESCO, we also work and promote what we call cultural industries, like film, music, book publishing, and we have a series of what we call the creative city networks, where cities can sign up, where there can be a city of design, city of gastronomy. Of course, there's also city of craft and traditional craft, but city of music. And you will see that in many places when you start having, for example, international film festival, international music festival, book publishing fair, and then that was also a very good way to attract tourism to town as well. So maybe traditional thing doesn't have to always be at the center stage, because there are many emerging modern cities that have been very successfully using these contemporary cultural expressions as a way to promote tourism in the city. And then how to do that? Of course, I mean, many previous speakers have talked about how to do that, especially our colleague at the Yaana venture. But then there's one thing I would like to point out is the participation of the really different stakeholders would be very important. And by this, I'm talking about stakeholders beyond the tourism sector. You cannot develop tourism just with us people working in the culture and tourism sector. For example, I mean, Randy told me about example about Nan, how they have made an effort to put on the electric line underground to make the city more presentable. And of course, tourism sector would have no power to really do this thing, and this is where infrastructure people have to come in. And like, for example, like one of the side effects that we had in Siem Tay is for the tourism, when they found out, they started coming very quickly, and too many people from the city, from Hoi An, saw the opportunity. They started coming to buy land, to start building guest house and hotels. And this is where city, we had to work with the local government to really start putting on policies on how you prevent these moving in from the outsiders who have a lot more capital, who have a lot more experiences on setting up tourism businesses, and it would create the point where gentrification start taking place, and would be the opposite impacts of tourism that we wanted to see. So that's the whole point I want to say, and maybe I just leave this with maybe a devil advocate kind of perspective. Of course, we talk about authenticity, and authenticity is a very important aspect for tourism, as we all see. But then when we talk about culture, and especially when we talk about intangible cultural heritage, it always changes. The life of people in these places change. You can't, in many places, when the intangible cultural heritage elements, when they don't have functions in the society, they don't have functions in their life anymore, they disappear. And in UNESCO, no matter we want to safeguard this heritage, we have to acknowledge the fact that there's a life cycle of all this heritage, and some of that would eventually disappear. So the concept of authenticity is never applied in the concept along that line with living heritage, because living heritage always changes. So this is a little bit of the, how do I say, dilemma, or so to speak, on how we continuously giving tourism a very updated experiences, and not something that had happened 500 years ago, 100 years ago, that we want the tourists to experience. So I don't have an answer for that, and maybe there's something that we could
Well, it's an extremely important question. You know, what is authenticity? And I want to challenge my panelists here in our remaining minutes is to consider this. I mean, when you go to Samui Town or Siem Reap at Angkor Wat, in the town in the evening, we've got loud music, and it might be hip hop or some Western music. As I get older, I'm not appreciating that very much. And so the question is that something we should avoid? And the second part then would be, if it is, how do we avoid it? How does non-city, where they buried the power lines, are doing some wonderful things for authenticity in non-city, today, in the evening, there's Thai music being played, and I think Non has a great future for keeping that cultural piece. People like me would love to just go experience that. I don't want music for 25-year-old Westerners. Am I the target customer or not? So let's give all that issue some thought. How do you define authenticity and how do you protect it? You said something very powerful about planning, and it shows sometimes how easy planning could be with the Misan example. By just simply asking the tour operators, why are you only coming in the morning, not the afternoon? And they said, oh, we want the music expression. And then you talk to the site managers and said, oh, that's easy, because we have this mechanism anyway, so we'll run extra shows, and now they come in the afternoon. Easy solution, right? Why is it easy? Because somebody was talking to the tour operators and then talked to the destination managers. And there's just all too little of that. That's all too little of that in the world. Here's an easy solution to an easy problem. So you're a bigger expert on tourism than you think. So finally, we turn to Mike Stewart of Peak DMC, the Thailand manager. So Mike, please.
Hi everybody, good morning. Good morning to everybody watching on live stream. I know we have quite a few people looking in from around the world. The guy over here just held up a little placard saying less than 10 minutes. We were originally given an 8-minute slot.
We have 13 minutes, not.
Okay, so just need to speed through a little bit of this. I suppose just to touch on a lot of the conversation that's already taken place. Peak DMC and Willem, we work in a very similar space. We've talked about overtourism is real. It's a real challenge for us. People want to travel to what they see. And we had the examples of Maya Bay, which was just unbelievable. Everybody wants to go. Siem Reap, Angkor Wat, Boracay. We've got places like the Taj Mahal that's now increasing the entrance fee for the locals to visit their natural heritage. These are real challenges I think that we're all faced with on a global basis. We heard from TEATA about developing out into new destinations, and something within Peak that we've done for a number of years now is to try and diversify and get into what we'd class the second tier destinations. But that brings two main key challenges, I think. One is that the infrastructure has to be in place. You talked about infrastructure. I think it's important that the people in the destination firstly want the tourism, but then are actually in a place that they can actually facilitate that, so training and things of that nature for the locals that are going to be delivering the actual experiences to the travellers. The second point is one that Willem brought up, which is we need help with telling people about this. If we speak to Thailand specific, you made the point that you go to a trade show and there's very much a big emphasis on the key destinations. People will always want to travel to them. People should want to travel to them. The key destinations for a reason. They're great places to travel to, but so are the second tier destinations. And I think if we could get more advertising and more engagement into the marketing of the second destinations, it would certainly help us to be able to convince our partners who are traveling to this destination to travel to them. I think those are the key issues from my perspective, is that trying to get that balance right. And to be able to do that, we've got to invest with all and engage with all the key stakeholders, which isn't just within the tourism industry, as you've pointed out. We've got to engage with the correct ministries, because the infrastructure does have to be correct. We do have to have the right type of marketing, the right amount of marketing, the right amount of support. Otherwise you build somewhere and for years you've got major frustration because nobody goes, because they don't know about it. Even all the way up to Google. Good luck with that one, Willem. I'm not sure how we can approach Google, but I think it's a really valid point. I'll wrap up at that point because Randy's desperate to go out to the audience, which is what we were wanting to do originally.
Yeah.
So
sorry to rush you. Thank you very
No
much. And
problem.
I'm
No
sorry to give you the false impression that we'd have so much time. I was the worst offender, I guess. But if you have any comments, questions from the floor, raise your hand. But I want the panel to try to comment on this question I asked of what is authenticity, and thinking about intangible things like music, for example. That's sort of an outward manifestation. Is it important? And is it important to you? I mean, you've worked in Loy on all these elements of making an authentic product. Is the market reacting to that? And is that truly what the market wants?
Yes, for the case of Loi, I can just like say like authenticity of Loi still remains actually. And what we create in the programs actually, we put all of them in there. So the visitors can come and just have their own preference though. So for the case of Loi, I just have to say all the authentic activities have been put and offered to the visitors. And they enjoyed it. They can choose it. Either they want to go for the gastronomy or they want to enjoy the way of living. So for me, it's still there. There's no problem.
Are you getting enough visitors?
Of course, day by day, yes. Because, you know, when we talk about sustainable tourism, right, we are not just thinking about numbers, seriously. So what we monitor at the moment is the spending and the value.
Is the spending today what you want it to be?
Almost.
Almost, okay.
Yes, I have enough patience. Yes.
Good. Anything from the audience? Comments, questions? Yes, from the rear. We got a microphone right by you already.
Thank you very much. My name is Joseph. I am from Solomon Islands, and that's in the Pacific, for those of you who don't know. It's northeast of Australia. Very interesting to hear the presentation from different stakeholders in tourism. Let me contextualize our situation in the Pacific. We're very yet young in terms of developing the tourism sector as a commercial enterprise. Very much more focused on developing tourism from not only a cultural preservation perspective, but very importantly for us is the conservation of the islands, the ecosystem, the land itself, in the face of climate change. As we all know, the small island states are the most vulnerable. I've been listening to this presentation and I haven't heard much mention, although it was, I think it was clarified in one of the presentations about tensions that emerge between governments having their national interest, between community groups, again, having their own agenda about what they see as the most important objective in tourism development, but also about external influence. And so, in our case, it's the climate change phenomena. And I was wondering whether there would be cases in the Asia region where you've evolved some mechanism for arbitrating conflict or dispute that arises. We heard the stories and it's almost like a smooth ride, successful, good stories to tell. It's all a successful episode. I'm sure there are cases where tension have emerged in communities, and I'm just wondering whether GSTC, for example, and I know you have sets of criteria that you've developed, have delved into this area in a number of cases that we perhaps could learn from. Yeah. So it's arbitrating tension or conflicts that emerge in the tourism sector.
Yeah, it's an excellent question, and this is the reason we have criteria about public participation, which has to be a complex process of informing the community about the imperatives of tourism. Hanh, I'm going to turn to you about motorbikes in Hoi An. I think this is a very interesting case study here in Asia, where World Heritage Inscription in Hoi An transformed a community, what, 60,000 people or something, that was much poverty, and now they have 3 million visitors per year. A lot of people, a lot of money in the bank now. Their lives have been transformed in 20 years. And the city planners had to go through a process of convincing the residents. If you've been to Vietnam, you know people are very attached to their motorbike. And the cultural zone of Hoi An, the client wants to stroll around by foot. And so they gradually increased. Could you comment upon that, how they gradually increased? And they had to communicate to the community that this is the #1 complaint and the #1 desire of the visitors to be able to stroll around. But they went gradually, didn't they, in terms of geographic zone and hours and so forth? Can you comment on that process?
Yeah, I think that was something that created the heated debates between the local residents and the local government. Local residents were not, of course, happy. So dialogues came in, and I think dialogues maybe not helping in all cases, but at least it's really open platforms for people to express their concerns and ideas. And so I think eventually the local government came to terms with the point that, okay, you are not closing the town for all time, but you are opening the town, making it accessible for motorbikes during certain hours. Like, so for example, early in the morning, when people have to go to work, at lunchtime, when people come home in the evening, when people come back from work. So they give certain hours where local residents could go on the motorbike into town, and that I think was made possible thanks to the open dialogues between the different stakeholders.
And doing it gradually, they couldn't do it radically. So it's a complex issue, but it requires a mechanism where there's public participation. And public participation is going to happen differently in the different social and political context of each place. But you need the mechanism in place, listening to the community, and you're informing them why we may all benefit as a community for doing something that a few of you might be a little bit uncomfortable with. So it requires a lot of dialogue. Anything else from the floor? Yes, Ram.
Randy, this is addressed to you. You spoke about, class tourism rather than mass tourism in terms of, the first few slides that you put up. There's an ever-increasing conflict between that concept when it comes to the developing world. I'm taking India as an example. The moment we approach governments and say, hey, raise the fees so that you get more revenue rather than numbers, there's this eternal issue about, no, we got to make everything accessible for everybody. You're a democracy. The moment you sort of make it very elitist, you defeat the purpose of, the common man being able to access it. How do destinations in the developing world resolve these kind of issues with governments?
Yeah, we don't want it to be elitist. We draw kind of a fine line at times. We'll try this one. It's not easy to manage, but you can manage in a way that the access is somewhat controlled but not elitist. And I think when you have an admission price that's based on attracting the right customers, you can also make an exception for the local community, by the way. I think it's perfectly acceptable. You don't hear complaints about the foreigners paying more than local people in a developing country. If you have your own alphabet, by the way, like the Thai do or the Chinese, don't say foreigner price, just write adult. Most people don't question it, but you don't need to hit them in the face with it either. So I think you can have local pricing versus international pricing. Nobody really complains about that. That can be managed well. It doesn't need to be elitist. In Petra, Jordan, the World Heritage Site, the entranceway is very narrow, so they were getting choked off on too many visitors with short-term stays. You really need 2 days to see Petra. And there was product where the German Europeans sunning themselves in the Red Sea in Egypt was being sold a day trip to go to Petra, to fly from Sharm el-Sheikh to Aqaba, take an hour-and-a-half bus ride, and they were choking it. About 10 years ago, the Petra Authority said, if you cannot show evidence that you spent a night in our country, you're paying more. I don't think that's elitist. I think that's Petra saying to those European visitors, we want you to come, but come next visit where you planned it and spend 2 days. Is that elitist or is that planning? I mean, these are philosophical questions. But I don't think it is inherently elitist, but it does need to be given some thought so, it's managed properly. So that those who are willing and able to pay. So I think that's a key concept here, is that the pricing and some of these strategies are not designed as attracting only the rich people, but it's designed to get people who come and plan and appreciate the site and not just pass through quickly. Willem?
Yeah, another thing, other than pricing, it's also management. There are several museums in Europe that I've seen that they actually have quota. So it's one price or maybe museum member prices, but they let in only a number of visitors per 1 hour, because they kind of know how long it will take for a visitor to typically go to the museum. And that's another way to manage a place, and it's not elitist, it's just being the first to go there. And what you will see, I was in the Whitney Museum in New York last year, and it happened, and we were up there early, and we didn't know they'd have a quota system. And later on we came back, and there was this whole queue out of people getting in. And I've noticed that people just like see the queue, it's like, never mind, we don't want to go. Because there's a lot of people that go to a place because it's so easy to get in there, and they don't mind that it's crowded, they just check it off their list. So you can make it a little bit more difficult, and therefore people that really want to visit it, they appreciate it, and they will do a little bit more effort. So it doesn't need to be all about price.
Well, it's a great discussion. I'm sorry we have to stop because we have to convert the room into our 3 breakouts. So it's time to break so we can break up the room. So in fact, I'd ask you to, the MC will come on, but we do need to step out into the break area very shortly. So do you have a few words, MC? So thank you very much, panel. Great discussion. We could talk forever on it. Thank you so much for your contributions. Round of applause.
Okay, please give a big round of applause to our speaker, and I appreciated the speech you gave us. I would like to thank all of our speakers for this insightful speech. Thank you. Okay, and now let's take a break. And before you come back, then I please come back 10 minutes before next session. And now we have 3 rooms for interesting topic. You can check our topic from Moderator in front of this room. And who want to stay this session can leave your belonging onto the chair. And who want to change session, please keep your belonging together. And I want to see everyone there about 11:30. Please come back 10 minutes before next session. Thank you.
Thank you.